Okay. All right, can I? Oh, is it?
There we go. Okay. Yeah, so for my presentation, I originally wanted to do multi-GPT because I thought it sounded cool. And then it's basically just auto GPT and multiple hats. So I decided to do both of them. So yeah, so kind of going off of some of the earlier presentations that we had on general purpose agents, auto GPT and multi GPT are essentially just low code general purpose agent libraries. And so they're just designed to take in inputs through like a CLI UI, and they build on GPT-4 and use kind of chain of reasoning to like execute tasks. So yeah, so they're really good for and yeah, they get better. So AutoGPT does get better results than GPT-4, especially if you ask it to do things like, oh, can you analyze this data set for me? Because it has a few different integrations into both searching capabilities and then also a couple of different tools. And AutoGPT is fairly configurable. And so yeah, so like AutoGPT is kind of like the first iteration on top of GPT-4, and it was kind of built with like a short-term memory and a chain of thought, chain of reasoning prompting, and then it essentially will just self-prompt itself after it realizes that, oh, I need to break this big task down into a couple of different subtasks. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it can use like different tools. And it's executed from a CLI, and it doesn't actually have a pip install at the moment, which is kind of unfortunate because it's a bit clunky to clone and then to get running on your computer. But yeah, essentially, if you like clone the repository and then give it your GPT-4 API key or your Open API key, then it can start with GPT-4. And one of like the main, so like the pros is that it's like pretty simple to set up and to execute, like once you get the repository running on your computer. And also this is, I think, kind of geared towards those like folks who don't really have a lot of programming experience, and so it's like fairly simple to just like run on your computer. But it doesn't really have a lot of constraints or like verification when it comes to giving the agent some guidance if you especially know how a task should be completed or if it gets confused. And also as a result of like the constraints, it has a tendency to hallucinate, and then also if it makes a mistake early on, it tends to have compounding errors because it doesn't let you intervene like halfway through the reasoning chain, which a few people commented on when I was like looking up about it like earlier today. The documentation is also not very good. It's kind of difficult to understand how the internals work here. And also it says that you can configure it by yourself to like make your own GPTs, but it doesn't really provide like really extensive instructions on how to do so. So you kind of just have to go through the repo and like read everything to figure out how to tailor it to your use case. And so AutoGPT works by using chain of reasoning, and then multi-GPT will spawn different auto-GPTs as experts to like perform certain tasks. So like multi-GPT kind of takes it a step further, where you can give it a task and you're like, oh, I want to make this kind of presentation. Or in the case of like the one demo I was able to find for multi-GPT, he said that I want to make a paperclip company that has the same advertising style as Apple. And so multi-GPT was like, okay, if I have this, then I have to make a certain set of agents. So which agent should I recruit? And then it comes up with like Henry Ford and then like Steve Jobs and like Bill Gates or something like that as like its 3 experts. And then it has them kind of like complete different tasks associated with like how I can come up with a project plan or how I can come up with like a product plan for this particular product. And then, yeah, it still does like the same self-prompting that AutoGPT does. It takes like a task and it'll break it up into what it believes are like the correct subtasks to execute. And then it also uses GPT-4 to execute. And then it also has like a bit of the same issues around as AutoGPT in that like you don't really get a lot of control over like who the experts are that are being recruited or the tasks that are like the subtasks that are being executed here. So it's like great for people who don't actually like want to have a framework, but for those of us who are trying to use this like in a larger framework, it doesn't offer you a lot of controls. And so you'd have to like go and fix the code if you like wanted to use it in a more I don't know, like a more in like a coding project where you want to have some more checks on each of the runs. Yeah, I hope that was pretty clear. There isn't really much to present on that aside from this because multi-GPT doesn't have any like articles on it or anything. It just has like the one presentation that's like done on the GitHub page itself, which is like a 5-minute presentation. And also it doesn't really have very much documentation at all, aside from like go read through all of like the code that's on the repo, which is unfortunate. But yeah, apparently AutoGPT like had a really big presence like earlier last year because it did perform better than ChatGPT, which is pretty cool.
It has some tens of thousands of stars on GitHub.
Yeah. Yeah, any questions on that?
So what is the difference between ChatGPT and Auto?
So ChatGPT will just run based off of the prompt, right? But then AutoGPT self-prompts itself. So essentially it like, well, you can give it a prompt like, I think one good example of like where AutoGPT would work really well is like the Old Faithful data set that we had like in the first week, because it has the ability to kind of tell itself like, oh, if I were someone who had to analyze this, this is how I would analyze it. Okay, I'm going to take the next step and like analyze it. And then I'm going to take the next step and the next step.
Okay.
Until it reaches a step where it feels like the task has been completed.
Yeah. So it can build the prompt chain automatically.
Yes, yeah. And then, yeah, with the multi-GPT, it doesn't just build the prompt chain, it also builds like the agent prompts like for each of them that it'll run like at each time step.
Can it go against a different model other than OpenAI?
No, that's one of the main issues with it at the moment. I think that if you wanted to, you could go through the code and like reconfigure everything so that it uses like Olama, for example. But there's like no way to do that out of the box. Like you'd have to go edit the code yourself.
This is one of the earlier artist papers from last year. It was so popular. Like this and Baby AGI. Those were the similar.
Yeah. They got $12 million in funding last October, apparently. And they haven't updated
stars is 160K.
Yeah.
160K.
You have a demo or
I was not able to get AutoGPT to work on my computer. So
All right, guys. So this was a great presentation, and I think AutoGPT is of all the projects that we have, I think this has collected the greatest number of stars. And Patrick pointed out that Prakash pointed out it has close to 160K stars.
Yes, and fork is its fork of GitHub repo is 41.6K. So that many people are interested in knowing more about it.
Wow. So this is it. Yeah. And Patrick pointed out that this is one of the earlier agentic frameworks. This and Baby AGI are some of the older agentic framework. So again, low code framework But as Yashila pointed out, it's a little bit hard to set up and get it to run. The documentation needs improvement. So anyway, all right, guys.